So this is the March 16th, 2017 SIG scalability meeting, public recording. Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay, so I have an agenda item on here. If you guys can see it. So it basically goes back to our configuration work, flags, etc. Joe, I don't know if you know, but I actually closed the proposal down just because I've had a conversation with Daniel. And he kind of explained to me the direction in which configurations and flags are going in the future, how they're going to remove a bunch of flags being sent to all the components, and they're going to be put into a file called component config. And that's going to be, there's going to be a whole new mechanism how to update, change those on the fly dynamically, et cetera. And those are going to be put into config maps so that you can pull them out as basically a string. It gets converted into a JSON, and then you can modify it there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I closed the proposal because of the direction things were going, and honestly, there was already some momentum in that direction, and it was just going to get in the way, and people were already bragging about it. Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, I said, so, we've been talking to Brian, and it looks like a lot of that stuff might end up circling around, sorry, give me a second, I got to get on my bus. Maybe circling around Fig cluster lifecycle. Yeah,
there was some discussion about that. I saw that on Google Groups.
So there's that going on. And then there's still going to be some command line flags, and depending on how this stuff works, if it pulls it off of disk versus pulling it off of the API server directly. I mean, so there's still some stuff we're going to want to collect, but yeah, I think it's time maybe to take a step back and make sure that it fits together with everything else that's going on.
Yeah, and so I did that by closing the ticket and then moving in a different direction by analyzing what we have right now, where the direction is going, et cetera. And so one thing that as a group we realized is that out of all the components, API server seems to be somewhat of a snowflake because it doesn't have a /config-z endpoint. All other components do. And part of the reason why we suspect that's the case is because of sensitive information that might be exposed there, right? So anyway, we felt that there was enough of a consistency issue there with all the components. We felt that we can control the exposing of sensitive data enough that we can go ahead and just create the config-z endpoint, put a lot of those configurations into component configs, and then expose that as a config-z endpoint and API server. And so I went ahead and did that endpoint, and I think it works out real well. I mean, it's nothing different from what other components are doing. It's consistent, and we as scalability will be able to get some information from API server that we need for the work we need in the future going forward, right? There is some pushback, of course. It wasn't too unexpected against this direction. So anyway, I just want some advice, maybe see how I can get everyone on board on this and move forward with this endpoint. It really is an endpoint that already exists in the components. It's nothing new. I don't think it's as controversial as what we were proposing earlier, and I think it's consistent with the future direction of the program. So I'm not entirely sure what the pushback is, other than like, oh yeah, we want to do this in kubelet and concentrate and focus on kubelet only. That seems to be what I'm hearing from people.
So I think between me and Tim, we're looking at this also from the angle around sort of cluster supportability and making sure that we can create sort of self-healing and self-introspection tools. And so I think we should definitely, me and Tim should take a look at this and help push it along and make sure that it'll work for both the scalability usages, but also for essentially cluster health and healing tools and
yeah.
Very cool.
What's interesting to me is the sort of life cycle between what is considered component config and what people are trying to put into config map, because component config to me is not a sold story, right? Like it is, at least this current incantation of how it's done, right? It requires a lot of care and feeding and love. In order for you to do a simple thing like adding a single command line flag requires you to regenerate the entire API.
Yep.
Right? And that is a non-trivial level of work for something which is a trivial thing, right? So if a person wants to add a simple flag, they need to regen everything. And that is quite the super high bar for adding what are the equivalent of a knob in a file, right? So there's going to have to be this whole round trip process. I think it seems to be critical massing in this release cycle because Brian sent out that email.
Yeah.
So I see many points converging. Like there's a proposal on the scheduling SIG to also do this, right? To basically have a single configuration file to rule them all for the scheduler. And it will be a config map. Whether or not they will push all the details through to component config is still a TBD item, right? So,
Okay.
so it's this release cycle, there's going to be a lot of churn. And I think what's going to happen as a result is going to figure out what is the process that we are going to use. It's going to be some configuration file. How it's going to be versioned, how it's going to be stored is still kind of,
It's still
I
up in
would
the
say,
air. But
that's still up in the air.
Daniel, it seems like they've already decided on a direction. Their whole, it's like move the community towards that direction, really. So that's what I thought also trying to do, just round people up and go like, we're going here.
Brian,
Just to be clear, the people who decided on the direction are not the ones who are actually going to be putting in the engineering effort. So there's a lot of room to actually, they can decide all they want. The devil's in the details.
Yeah, exactly. Like Joe beat me to it. He's like, Brian sometimes decides things and then, what gets done and what actually appears, in the code at the end of the day, sometimes they're two very different things.
Well, it still remains the fact that Brian does guide a lot of the reviewers and the people who are approving things. And it seems like whenever he wants to jump on something, he sends his little minions to, go over that.
I think the general direction is correct, but versus take this hill or take that hill, that still needs to be determined, right? Like we're basically going north.
This of course pulls us back into a variety of governance issues, which are kind of thrashing around pretty.
Anyway,
well, I mean, it's just revealing how many of these conversations end with that point.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, I feel like the direction I'm taking there is really not controversial at all. I mean, it's really, and it gets us what we need from API server. A lot of those details. Spartacus would be a project that would benefit from this. It just seems to be the right thing to do, and I just don't understand the pushback it means.
Hey Jay, you just typed a comment in or a question about why is SIG scale on this topic?
Yeah, just curious. I'm kind of ramping up, so it's probably just my own ignorance. But.
Yeah, well, we've been on this topic for a really long time, and most of it started, and I think we still have this issue, which is how do we compare the performance of different configurations? We've spent a lot of time thrashing around on config tweaking for things like QPS limits. And the issue that we've had for quite some time here is that the overall system performance or throughput can be massively affected by some of these configuration things. So we've long wanted to have a way to capture all of that information in a standard, exportable, machine-readable, comparable way, and we're still not there yet.
Yeah, so I think the idea is you want to have one tool, you plunk it down, it grabs enough information, not just to get you performance data, but to also be able to say here's the configuration plus the performance data. So that way you don't just have results, you have the full config along with the results.
Okay, so this is for measuring things, and yeah, I got you. And that information just isn't published with the women. Okay, I see.
So,
All right. So I'm just looking for maybe support here, a little help getting this moving along the right direction, some advice. Take a look. I think it's reasonable, and it'll get us where we need to go.
Okay, I will chime in on the issue. I see it up here. I'm sure if Jordan's the current reviewer, he's going to needle you on any security issue.
Yes,
So,
we've already started doing that.
Yeah. All right. I will probably ping you on Slack and take a look at it too.
Sounds good. All right.
great. Tim, I know you've been like a flake monster here. Can you want to give us just a view as to how things are going?
Better. I mean, there's been results pushed back. I think we found a bunch of timing artifacts in the code, and we fixed a number of them. I think the second step too that folks want to do is to we talked on SIG testing is to segregate the tests so that the ownership is clear, right? Because right now it's just a monolith, right? The first step is segregation. The second step is to start to, have like the best practices guide proliferate, because there's a bunch of, because there is no ownership right now, right? There's a bunch of timed sleeps and a bunch of other like gnarly things that normal people who are maintaining this code would have refactored out over a period of time, right? And sometimes the tests were put up there in haste to get something in place to validate behavior, but they were never refactored or cleaned. So at least on the SIG scheduling side, we did all three parts, right? So we segregated, we found the timing artifacts, and we refactored it to get rid of them. Now, I would like to take this forwards, sort of spread the gospel, so to speak, that this is the easiest way for everyone to benefit. So that way you get instant assignment and you get less flakes. If you follow these set of patterns, you'll be on a better path. I don't want to own it, but I think what I'll do is start to do some roundabout gospeling while I try to get pieces of the testing infrastructure cleaned up to support that notion of what we eventually want to do is to be able to plunk down, a single end-to-end binary at one point, and then be able to, gather all the data. Because right now we have this sparsling of tools, right, and everything else. And I think I'm going to work along those lines to get this moving forward. So I gave you the full round trip circle, but I talked about why some tests are flaking and how some people have gone about fixing them.
Is there something you would want to talk to the community about? Just get everyone kind of pay attention to this?
Yep. I'm writing up a proposal to basically say like, hey, let's follow this pattern. Any other SIG that's underneath my purview, like I will talk with Merrick and Wojtek and push the performance ones into their own performance location and do a similar pattern there.
Okay.
And then after that, write up the proposal and submit it to Kubernetes Dev.
Perfect. So maybe this is related to what you're talking about, and if it is, I'm sorry, I'm just repeating it. I've noticed that a lot of the flakes are timing issues, like something is being created or being brought up, and then no consideration is given to like the fact that things actually take time, and then you expect it to be there, but your feedback is no, it's not there, and then we throw an error, and then the test fails. Is this what you're mentioning? Like
Yeah. So the big changes that we're making, or that we made inside of the scheduling tests, is instead of us having an explicit wait, which is done all over the testing infrastructure, is to basically have an informer. The informer then is looking for specific events and will time out after a much longer timeout interval, like 2 minutes. Basically means that it never saw the event at all, right? And instead it's basically looking for this very narrowed window of exact behavior, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a cool model.
All right. Any other topics for today?
I don't see Merrick on, so I don't think he's ready to talk about the SLO update.
Right.
I know he's working on it, so.
Excellent. Well, maybe next week. I see Joe reappearing. Did you have a comment?
Just showing my face.
Okay, super. Always appreciated. Okay, so I think we'll call it done for today.
I have one last comment just before we go. SIG Cluster Ops is talking about creating a migration guide or an upgrade guide. So I just wanted to make you guys aware of it since we've been looking at the SCD upgrades. I don't know if they plan to incorporate or point at.
So there is, if you're talking with Rob, There is a upgrade document or in the Google Docs that I created for portions of this, and it basically links out to say that here's the issue, this is what we know about, this is the upgrade strategy, and here are all the links to the pieces that you'll need to know about. So I can post that to you on Slack if you want to loop him in, but honestly, we should really be rallying around the upstream documentation so that way it's clear to everybody, right?
Agreed.
Yep.
I'll point you at the link.
Thanks.
Great. Super. Okay, well, I think we're done for this week. See you in the community meeting.